I believe people should not go directly into cyber. The reason for this is cybersecurity is not a real industry in and of itself. People hate me for saying this. Some people can absolutely do it, and some people absolutely can't. I'm not a father, but I like to post dad jokes. That makes me a bit of a faux pas.
Love it. And I have to say, from the industry, thank you so much for your service as a faux pas. That's great stuff. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Cybersecurity Stand-Up. Super excited because this is actually the kickoff point for season 2. Very exciting. We've got a star guest, and I've also got a new co-host. So we're going to jump right into some introductions because this season is just like jam-packed full of incredible people with incredibly different career journeys, different job titles, and we just have like so much to share with you. So in case you have forgotten in all this time, my name is Bronwyn Hudson. I'm your host for Cybersecurity Stand-Up, and my new co-host is actually my boss. Very exciting. Lauren Patrick, the Uptick's Director of Community and Customer Marketing. Lauren, can you give us a quick little intro?
Yes, thank you, Bronwyn, and hello, cyber world. Lauren Patrick here, the newly minted Director of Community and Customer Marketing at Uptick's. I've been in cybersecurity since 2020, and this is my third cyber startup. So very cool to be doing a podcast like Cybersecurity Stand Up and getting to talk with our experts like Dustin. Woo! Dustin, I will pass the baton to you.
Hi, so I'm Dustin Heywood. I'm otherwise known in the industry as Evil Mog from Team Hashcat. I'm a password security researcher, and I'm also the chief architect of IBM's X-Force. So I started off my world, actually, oddly enough, as a network engineer back probably about 15 years ago. Wound up doing a bunch of network defense contracting, wound up in Afghanistan hooking up satellite gear, wound up somehow at a government-owned bank as a security analyst, and then got stolen to go work at IBM about 7 years ago. So started off as a tester, moved my way up, became a senior technical staff member, then got promoted to chief architect about a year ago, and now here I am.
I feel like so many of the sort of like cyber journeys that I hear of people going into very successful cyber careers, there's no linear path whatsoever. And it's a lot of moments of like, and then this happened. There's no like, reasonable jumping off point. It's just like so wonderful to hear every time about how you got to where you are. Do you have any, that's actually, a lot of people ask, what's your kickoff point in terms of what would you recommend people getting into cyber at this point in their lives, whether they're just graduating? Do you have a hot take on that?
I do actually. And my hot take is actually mildly controversial. I believe people should not go directly into cyber. The reason for this is cybersecurity is not a real industry in and of itself. People hate me for saying this, but all cyber is just, advanced security is like basically advanced system administration, advanced network engineering, advanced help desk. I recommend doing 3 to 4 years minimum in a general IT field, ideally customer-facing role in an enterprise environment, so you get exposed to that sort of world, and then move into, say, cybersecurity through a SOC or penetration testing. And the reason for this is you're going to hit a wall if you go straight in. Some people can absolutely do it. Some people absolutely can't. And if you want to have an easier way of advancing, that conversion from general IT into security is far easier than going straight in.
And it's interesting too, Dustin, we're hearing a lot of industry chatter about the lack of skilled workforce. There is no talent pipeline. And so I think a lot of people are like, I want to work in cybersecurity, but don't understand that they need to go work in a NOC, like learn how to run a network before making that leap. So could you talk a little bit more about like any apprenticeships or internship programs you've seen that have really helped get people ready for one of those careers?
Well, I'll describe mine. I did mine back in 2006. This is back when my MCSA was from 2003, so don't judge. But we did a program where it was basically 6 months in college, went through, did like our CCNA, did our MCSA 2003s, did our Linux, and then we went through and we bid on a mock RFP, and then went through the entire process of implementation, did all the business aspects of things. From there, I then went into working at a NOC, and then went in through the IT route. The reason for all this was you build all these general IT skills, and when I'm doing penetration testing on Active Directory, for example, I still lean on these weird esoteric Active Directory skills. And so really find out where you want to be in cyber and then build everything upon that. It's like playing Dungeons and Dragons. You don't go straight into one of the prestige classes. You need to rely on your baseline class. You can't just be like a straight 1000% level 20 rogue warrior. It just doesn't happen that way.
Okay, off the back of that, I want to detour us a tiny bit because As a huge fan of yours on Twitter, I'd love to get the backstory on Evil Mog, the name, the reputation, the memes. Can you tell us about that while we're talking about D&D?
Absolutely. So Evil Mog actually came from my gamer tag back in the day was Mog, the Moogle from Final Fantasy VI. It was also the first aircraft I ever flew. I'm actually a licensed glider pilot, and CG Mog was the aircraft I flew. From there, I went to work for a bank, and they had a rule against doing cybersecurity research under your real name. So when I was working with Team Hashcat back from 2011 to about 2015, Evil Mog was the handle, but I started off as just Mog on IRC. I met a guy named Matthew O'Gorman who had the same handle. So because he had the name, we did deconfliction. I became Evil Mog. He became Good Mog. And then in 2015, my name, my cluster size, my company got leaked in a paper actually for Usenix 2015. And so I just went full public with my identity. And the company's like, look, I guess it's out there. Here's this guy doing these things. So that's how I became famous on that. As for the memes, I get really bored and I like to go browse Facebook, or Meta as they call themselves now. And I belong to a number of dank meme and dad joke groups. And
Nice.
see, I'm not a father, but I like to post dad jokes. That makes me a bit of a faux pas. But I like to go repost those on Facebook to go make everyone laugh really hard. Because, I mean, this industry gets. We work long hours. We work really hard, and so rather than posting things that are, stir crap and start fights on Twitter, I just like to make people laugh.
Love it. And I have to say, from the industry, thank you so much for your service as a faux pas. That's great stuff. And we're happy to have you on there. I think that's actually how I discovered you, or, heard about you. So that's wonderful. So let's switch gears here a little bit, and kind of dive into the meat of it. I know it's sort of a little bit of an over asked question, but I do want to know, like, at this moment in time, we're almost, we 3/4 of the way through this year. That's kind of intense. Right now in 2023, what is your monster under the bed in this industry? What is the one big thing that's keeping you up at night? What should we be worried about?
So my monster under the bed has been the same monster I've had under the bed for the last 10 years, and that's people reuse passwords between sites, like say their social media and their corporate world. And the problem is you as a consumer have no way of knowing if the site you're logging on to has proper cybersecurity controls. Now, here's the thing. Breaches are a fact of life. It's not a question of if you're going to breach, it's a question of when and how you deal with it. And this applies to, everything broadly. I mean, with the appropriate controls, you're going to keep things at bay. But as I tell people, there's two types of companies in this world. Those that have been breached and those that have been breached and don't know it yet. So with this, people go and they extract passwords out everywhere, and they wind up cracking these passwords, and then they reuse these passwords. And the industry doesn't make anything really better than a password, right? So, if everyone gave out enterprise password managers and devices for retrieving those and automatic ways of cycling secrets, this world would be so much better. Because the average person has, 400 different sites they log into? I'm not going to remember 400 different passwords. It's just not going to physically happen. So I need this is the problem now, is people will reuse a common variant of a password between systems, and then they'll change companies every couple of years, and they'll reuse that same baseline password. And so, people really are the weakest link, but there's no real way of enabling people to not be the weakest link at this point, other than every company, like, for example, ours. I don't normally name brands, but our company buys one password for every company or for every employee automatically. And so they give you an enterprise version and a personal version for your entire family. I don't know any of my passwords because they're long and they look like line noise. That's the only good password.
So I have a follow-up question for you, Dustin, regarding cyber hygiene and the lack of adoption of MFA, both in businesses and on the personal side. Like, are you having to coach your family on, like, for the love of God, please turn on MFA? Or
oh, yeah.
What are you sort of seeing out there among consumers?
Well, for example, I've been having to coach my family, coach the industry for 3 years solid. We went to every single conference we get our hands on and ran a demo on the Kraken password cracker. And all it was us demonstrating that, people can pull sleight of hand in authentication systems and store passwords in insecure ways. So realistically, it's just, we've been telling people, get a password manager, telling companies, go get one for your people. It's a combination of password manager plus MFA. Because here's the thing, MFA on its own, there's various implementations of MFA, and some are better than others. Like SMS-based MFA is largely useless because of SIM jacking. You've got email-based MFA. If someone's already got into your email, I mean, that's largely useless too. But the problem comes down to people lose fobs, people lose phones get stolen, people drop phones in puddles and they get destroyed. I mean, so there's no real clean way of handling this, which is why it's down to make sure you got backups to your password manager seeds, make sure you've got a password manager, make sure things are random, make it easy to cycle passwords. But this is an unsolved problem in the industry. And you know what, when I retire in 10, 15 years, it'll still be an unsolved problem.
Yeah.
You look too young to retire in 10 to 15 years.
Oh, thank you.
Goals though. Yeah. And when it comes to, some the chatter around passwordless authentication, I'd love to hear your sort of take on that as well, because I feel like people love this idea but don't really know what they mean necessarily. They like the idea of biometrics, but what's your take on, like, is that a future that we can look forward to? Is that a totally, false promise, the whole idea of passwordless?
Exactly. So, I mean, biometrics, for example, we'll start with that. Biometrics is more about your ID. Like, I can't change my fingerprints when someone lifts them off. Little known fact, people who work with pineapples don't actually have fingerprints. They get burned off by a chemical called bromelain after about 5 years or so. So they're completely smooth. That's why they can't be fingerprinted. But things like passwordless, all passwordless is just it abstracts away the password. There's still a shared secret stored in the system. There's still something in the back end that still needs to be cycled. Like if you look at Active Directory, passwordless, Windows Hello authentication, there's still a secret stored in a seed somewhere. And if a hacker manage to penetrate the system and get all the password hashes out of the back end, even though they're abstracted away with passwordless, there's still authentication secrets that need to get cycled. So, and there's things like OpenID Connect make this easier, and there's things like sign on with my social media sign-ons. It's just kicking the can up the road to somebody else. Like, for example, when a major cloud provider got breached, I'm not going to name on this because I don't want to go kick them when they're down. There's still passwordless employed, but their signing keys got leaked. So it's just shifting the responsibility elsewhere. So it's still going to be a problem in some way, shape, or form.
And then, oh, sorry, I froze for a second. One other question that I have kind of in the same vein is that I think one of the most recent NIST recommendations is basically like, get rid of all the arbitrary complexity requirements, that kind of stuff. But like that the additional thing that you can do as an organization is implement credential screening. Can you speak to that as well?
So credential screening is things like making sure your passwords haven't been reused in a breach. Now, I have a mild issue with some of the NIST recommendations.
Okay.
This is a spicy take. And this issue is that NIST says you no longer need to cycle authentication secrets, except for case or instances of a breach. You're never going to know when you need to get breached. Privileged credentials need to be cycled at least annually, if not more, or if not, at point of use. And then every time somebody leaves, like every time you lose a backup admin, you should honestly cycle passwords. And then also, unless you have proper threat modeling in place to map out an unprivileged user to a privileged user, you almost need to treat all the users in your environment as privileged users. So, yeah, I mean, password cycling becomes an issue, but that's where password managers kick in. This process should be automated and seamless so the users don't see them, because you're right. The arbitrary, I'm going to change my password every 90 days. I'm going to go from summer 2021 to spring 2021 to fall 2021, et cetera, and rotate through these. Every time the year change will be 2022, 2023, or I'll use like my company name and then some arbitrary number. If you make it so that the passwords can be extremely complex and just rotated without the user's knowledge or need, and automate that whole process. Like, for example, if I was a CEO, this is a really bad take, I would go spend $1,000 in every single person and buy them a cell phone. I would install our enterprise password manager on that cell phone. I'd make sure they have full access to access the systems. Because here's the thing, if they if they can't remember a 20-character password, which they shouldn't be able to, or even say a 14-character one that's randomly cycled, so it's easy to enter, that solves most of my problem. If that thing rotates in the back end, is automatically synced, that deals with it. That's basically passwordless without all the issues of here's a reuse secret.
Let's just jump into the next question, Dustin, because this is something that I've always geeked out on, is just what the IBM X-Force actually is. So for those who might be somewhat new to cyber, could you talk a little bit about the IBM X-Force? What's your role specifically? And what's the day in the life of an X-Force team member like?
X-Force is IBM's outsourced security services arm. We actually are part of IBM Consulting. So we have three major groups. X-Force Red is the penetration testers, adversarial simulation, application testers, social engineers, basically the hackers. We break into anything from planes, trains, automobiles, medical devices, to corporate environments and everything in between. So that's the X-Force Red side of things where I started off. Every day is different because every target's different. So you do a couple of weeks on an engagement, write your report. Sometimes our adversarial simulation folks are doing 6 months on an engagement, doing prep, doing security research and malware development. Then we have our incident responders, X-Force IR. These folks respond to breaches. They do everything from active threat assessments to incident response. These are the folks when the company's having their worst day, we come in to calm them down and get them back to normal. Because, a breach is going to be the most stressful time in the world, and we're there to help. We also have our cyber range based out of there, so we'll bring in people from all over the world, put them all together, and put them through a simulated breach. So once that's done, we have that group, and then we also have our threat intelligence team. So that's our research and development, malware reverse engineers, the people who find the really scary stuff and then put out intelligence that our other groups use. So that's the three major parts of X-Force. And then me as the chief architect, I handle a lot of the customer interconnections. So if we need to connect to do a pen test, incident response, I handle all the technology and tooling for those groups.
Very cool. And so you've been there for a hot minute, over 6 years now, right? And with sort of crossing the chasm with this mass mass awareness really of what threat actors are capable of following COVID, the rise of phishing emails, things like that. How has the X-Force changed? Are you working more with consumer brands where in the past it was more B2B? We'd just love to know more about that.
Honestly, we were working with everybody. I mean, our client makeup hasn't changed. It's crossed everything from small consumer brands to massive enterprise to IT, OT to aerospace and defense. Security awareness is really everybody's problem, and it's a business problem, and it reflects that with the quality of our testing. Like, we've always been known for being the groups that hires nothing but the best. And so we've always been, drawn into these really interesting engagements so we can see things that most groups typically wouldn't see.
That's really fascinating. And so if you could go back in time, like 5 or 10 years, I guess, at the start of your cyber career, like, what would you tell yourself? Like, if you had a crystal ball, like, what would you wish the tea leaves would have read for you?
I mean, so when I first started into cyber, I was a junior analyst working for a bank, and I put in some absolutely insane overtime. And then every minute I had that was spare, I'd be putting into learning. And the problem was, after you do all that nonstop, you eventually start to burn out. And my burnout hit extremely hard before I went over to X-Force. That burnout was, shall we say, epic. I was wearing bunny slippers into the office every single day out of just sheer annoyance for other things to express my disdain. I felt a stress-induced panic attack while I was doing the job of 4 people after a couple of my teams got let go. And I didn't think I could really go anywhere because I couldn't get my head out of where I was at. I went on medical leave for a couple of weeks, and I kept getting called out during my leave. So I said, heck with it, called up my friends over at X-Force I ran into at a conference, and decided to jump. So I guess what I tell myself is, no one's going to remember that you worked 80 plus hours a week, because if you drop dead in the office, they're going to replace you the next day. Work-life balance is absolutely critical. And despite the fact that everyone's got this pressure for always leveling up, you're going to lose a good 10 years of your life if you try and do that. So experience the real world now, because tomorrow may never come.
And that's a great segue to the next question too. You talked a little bit about burnout, wearing the bunny slippers into the office. What information would you want to share with the InfoSec industry about how you balance, like, knowing when you're on the edge of burnout and knowing when it's time to give yourself that space, that self-care, if you will?
The moment you realize you're burning out, you're probably already very deep into the burnout cycle. You're not going to see it. It starts off with little things like getting snappier than normal, or shunning away from friend groups. Everyone deals with burnout differently, though, and that's the thing. There's no one be-all, end-all solution. But if I could tell anybody, if your companies offer things like employee family assistance programs or the free mental health counseling, back 10, 15 years ago, there was kind of a stigma around seeking mental help. I view it now these days as more of a tune-up these days. Like, you go and get your car checked out routinely. You're speaking to somebody about the nature of our job is a very healthy thing. You're going to see some things in this industry, especially if you're working incident response, that you're going to wish you could unsee, and you unfortunately can't. So starting before you get burnt out is far healthier than waiting until you're burnt out and then you just flatline.
Preach it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it took me a good year and a half to come back from that hardcore burnout. Thankfully, IBM was awesome. They're like, yeah, here's your 40 hours a week, and if you work beyond that, we're going to start yelling at you till you work less. Here's mandatory vacations. I've been assigned on vacation once. I'm like, look, you've noticed you haven't taken your vacation. Here's your bonus. Your vacation starts now. We're cutting off your access. So that's just kind of the type of groups we work with. And I wish every employer was like that, because your people are your primary resource. I don't care about tooling. I mean, we can replace tools. I can't replace people.
And I want to double tap on what you referenced too with the burnout cycle. I've never heard that term before.
Yeah, but it happens,
so what are
right?
sort of sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, what are the stages? You mentioned if you think you're burned out, you're already there. But what have you learned is sort of the precursors of those early stages of burnout warning?
It's red flags is different for everybody, right? Some people I start getting testy with. I start finding the bad in absolutely everything. The worldview just sort of subtly shifts, and then you feel this need to work harder to get out of it, and that working harder makes it even worse. And so you get into the cycle, and it's worse for pen testers. Pen testers are prone to burnout for one simple thing. Popping a system is like this massive adrenaline rush. You go and you pop a system, or you spend thousands of hours, beating your head against the wall, trying many, many things. Fail. Oh my God, I suck at this. All of a sudden, pop, you get that adrenaline rush, you get the endorphin rush, you're on top of the world, and you're at this top of this mountain. And then all of a sudden, you start trying more things, you get through, and then you drop back down into this trying. So you're on this constant cycle of up and down with your moods. And just the naturally doing that will eventually burn somebody out. You need to take those breaks if you don't go take a vacation. Your 3 to 4 weeks a year are absolutely mandatory, or else your body just physically can't handle it. Incident responders, same deal. Our body puts out a stress hormone called cortisol. Company gets breached. All of a sudden, everyone's stressed. Cortisol causes confirmation bias. That confirmation bias creates more problems. All of a sudden, you're now into this downward spiral. The best advice I got when I was doing network engineering was every time you have a computer problem, go out, take a break, go for a smoke break. Now, I'm not going to advocate smoking. That's absolutely terrible in this day and age. I think everyone should quit. But when I actually managed to quit from 3 packs a day. It was rough back when I was in that industry. But I mean, 15 years now, nice and clean. It's been hard. But when I quit, I still grabbed a cup of coffee, went out with the smokers in the smoke pit, and had conversations to get that reset in the break. Here's the thing. There's no problem in IT that cannot wait 15 minutes. Even in the worst outage in the world, unless there's lives on the line, basically any mistake you make in that 15-minute golden window is just going to amplify the problem. Take a step back, hands off the keyboard. If you're going to write a cranky email, take a step back, let it reread. You just need to reset to get over that initial biological issue. It's nothing against you. It's just pure biology.
I think that's really good advice. The idea of regulating your nervous system when a crisis is happening is, I would say, blanketly good advice across all industries, but particularly this one. That's how it feels to me. Yeah, particularly salient. Yeah.
And that's the only thing. Everything else technical I can teach. I cannot teach that learning to reset. It's all about self-awareness, and everyone needs to go practice things. Like go do yoga, go do those flotation tanks, go get a massage, go out and go for a walk. Do something to just get yourself out of sitting at the keyboard for 80 hours a week, because sitting is the new smoking.
Yeah.
So quick question for you then, Dustin. Could you talk us through what you've actually done to decompress following a breach in real life? When you were in that high stress situation, did you take the PTO afterwards? Or if you didn't have time for PTO, what did you do for
So I collect extremely dangerous and adrenaline sport hobbies. I'm a licensed pyrotechnician. Special effects pyrotechnician Canada. So I do things like burning down structures for Alberta's regional Burning Man called Freezer Burn. I am a scuba diver, so I go scuba diving. I ride motorcycles. I'm a licensed glider pilot. I do anything other than IT to go decompress because I like the adrenaline, but it needs to be a different way to release everything. So, things go sideways. You're like, hey, let's do Taekwondo for a bit. Nothing beats going in and, getting the crap beaten out of you after, to get the full contact to combat out of there. But it's just anything to get some kind of a release. I know some people who sit there do cross stitch. I know some people who go volunteer at pet shelters. I know folks who draw, do painting, do art. Hey, if playing video games is your thing, go for it. Just do something that is not directly related to the IT. And yeah, sure, you want to go learn on the side, do it, but do things in moderation. Know yourself, make sure you get fed, eat a good proper meal, don't live off junk food, these kind of things.
This is such good advice. I need to hear this every day, because these things, like not only the activities that we do, the hobbies that we invest in, but also eating a good meal and like respecting your own body. I mean, I need that. I need it because it's a practice, just like anything else. It's something that you have to invest in, you have to pay attention to. And it's discipline led, just like a lot of other things are as well. It's not like something easy that finally you crack the code and you're like, oh yeah, I can eat and it's great and I've like figured it out. You have to just keep practicing.
I actually set an alarm on my watch, as well as the calendar entries, goes stop and eat or go take a break. And like that's the only way I do it, because unlike like most people, Outlook is my mother. If Outlook doesn't say it's happening, it's not happening, so it needs to get in the calendar.
I love that. I actually have a calendar reminder to journal every day, just to sit down, take 30 minutes and write.
Yeah, and that's the only way. If it doesn't wind up in the calendar, it's not happening. I mean, tomorrow never comes, but that 15-minute meeting that shows up in your calendar absolutely does.
Guaranteed.
So,
yeah.
This is actually an interesting segue too, because one of the things I want to talk with you about today was the rise of AI. Like these tools like calendars, ChatGPT, like they're supposed to make our lives easier. But on the flip side, we see threat actors using these tools against us, that they're able to access your Outlook calendar and get into your network that way, that the phishing emails have gotten even more sophisticated. So what do you see as the big pros and cons for AI, and where do you see it going?
AI is really poorly defined. We don't really have general AI these days. We have limited versions of AIs. In this day and age with ChatGPT and now Watson X, we have large language models. We've got, previous to that, we had neural networks. Before that, we had really large if-then-else statements that were performing things. But AI itself is really about augmenting human capabilities as opposed to outright replacing humans. The output from some of these models, they lack context. And so, yeah, they can be used to, a great use for AI is, for example, explaining what a payload does, because they can go through and look things up faster than I can. Can it write a payload from scratch? Not necessarily. Can it write code? Poorly. So I don't really see it as replacing folks, but I definitely see it as augmenting our capabilities as long as we don't rely on it too much. So yeah, attackers are using it, but they're using it poorly as well.
What about concerns like with phishing and being able to do deepfakes and things like that?
I mean, deepfakes are definitely scary, and phishing is always terrible, but this all comes down to social engineering. And I think no matter what, social engineering will always bite us, because people are crafty, and we're really good about convincing other people to do our things. End of the day, it's just wetware in biology, and people want to help out others. Using things like fear and coercion tactics or the social engineering techniques, or faking things out using AI. Yeah, that's a vulnerability, but it's always been. It's just the forgeries are getting better.
Preach it. And I think that's going to be the really interesting thing too, is to see like how sophisticated these social engineering schemes are going to get, because when we saw COVID pop off, everyone used COVID as a way to socially engineer people to give up their checking information for, their stimulus checks and things like that. So what do you sort of see as like the next big trend that threat actors might exploit?
Well, I mean, they're always looking for the newest thing, right? The new trend changes every 5 minutes based off popular culture. So, I mean, if I was a threat actor, I'd look at the most coming up popular culture trends, set up an analysis pipeline to give new pretexts, run testing scientifically, determine which ones work and which one don't against random audiences, even if they're not real targets, and then tune the attacks that way. I mean, that's kind of the pipeline we use when we're attacking people. Same way for the defenders is, start developing lists of here's what's new in popular culture, here's what's new coming out. Build a threat intelligence pipeline like we've got at X-Force, and determine what the new defenses are. But really, the only real defense against this is a healthy dose of skepticism and always developing procedures around these. They're going to get bypassed, but an unpopular opinion I have is if your entire environment can get taken down by somebody social engineering your help desk, your controls around the help desk weren't necessarily great. Privileged users internally should not be able to go take down your entire environment. You need to watch your insiders because insider threat is just as dangerous as an external threat. Whether it's through them intentionally going evil or them being social engineered, your privileged users are definitely going to be a problem.
And it's interesting because even companies that go through a SOC audit, like, don't always have the right admin permissions in place, like they don't have the right data classification. So what advice would you give to someone who is just getting started with setting up those permissions to make sure that someone doesn't have too much access?
Honestly, it comes down to a number of things. Really understanding your business is the most important part. Ask yourself, what if this particular business process broke down? What if a trusted person started doing something bad? What secondary or third or tertiary controls do you have to detect or prevent this? Everything comes down to risk. And you can do a couple things with risk. You can either accept the risk, you can mitigate the risk, or you can transfer the risk. But that's really about it. So it all comes down to a risk-based approach. I would say you don't want somebody transferring air miles off to somebody else if they get called in. Well, do they have audits? Do they have limits on how much they can transfer? It goes more beyond just simple IT. It goes into actual business controls, and then that should tie down to your IT controls.
Love it. So, self-serving question here, but as we look at all the different tools that can help with those controls, why is it so important to have that unified view of your threat intelligence and vulnerability management? There's a lot of players in this space that say they can do endpoint detection from code to cloud and know if it's an actual threat actor or an intern that's calling the API wrong. What do you think is sort of like the be all end all, like pie in the sky solution that we really need the whole industry to rally around?
Well, the problem you're going to have is every industry is different. And every solution I've seen, including yours, no offense, has been all around the IT controls and the IT operations of things. They don't really tie down into actual business risk. So things like you're not going to see, hey, somebody transferred out a bunch of Excel data via email or some side channel they downloaded onto a USB stick. You're going to see the controls to detect that, hey, USB writing is enabled, but you're not going to see that end to end unless you truly understand your business. And the problem is nobody really understands their business at the IT level, and nobody at the IT level truly understands, both ways around. So that's where we're seeing the rise of groups like BISOs and business risk folks getting tied into the IT world. But until, IT folks traditionally have hated talking business. It freaks us out. We hate people. You talk to business folks, they hate the IT world because they think we're all a bunch of dungeon-dwelling gremlins that sit in the dark. And it's all about learning those soft skills. I'm seeing this improve now with this focus on soft skills, but people will also look at, hey, I'm some company trying to sell some new thing or push to go fast and break things. They're not going to truly go into understanding their business model tied to IT risk because they're incentivized on publishing first. So that's where we're seeing a lot of this is, hey, I need to go deliver. People see IT as a roadblock. Here's the thing. The brakes on a race car make it go faster, not slower, because they truly understand the risk on this. So it goes back to the business. We need to have a more business-centric IT approach. Otherwise, we're just repeating the same thing. You offload to an MSSP. It's to be very transactional. It needs to be very partnership-based. So while your tools help, and I love your tools, by the way, you're never going to get that level of, hey, here's some business risk tied to, say, upticks, for example.
And so let's actually double tap on that for a second, because I think that the roles of a BISO and a CISO have become an increasingly blurry line.
Mm-hmm.
So when you think about who's actually responsible for monitoring risk, could you talk about sort of the ideal state of how that should be operating?
I mean, risk acceptance levels should be honestly owned by the CEO at the outright. Here is what we are willing to accept, and all units of the organization, regardless of where they are, should be working towards that. From there, then it's a collaboration between the CISO, CEO, CISO, etc.
I love that because you're good. You're good with me. So it does, to close the loop and thinking about that top-down approach, we've seen CEOs almost just ignore risk, right? They just sort of brush it off and say, oh, my CISO is going to handle that. And then they'll come to my board meeting with a budget of the tools that they want to go buy. And then my board is going to question that budget and why they need more resources. It seems like we saw a lot of those investments
Exactly. And the problem you're going to see is security and IT should not be a cost center. Security and IT are business enablers. We are there to make sure that the business functions. No company in the world has their primary business operation of keeping IT up, other than maybe a large cloud hyperscaler. They're there to make money, which means everyone in the company is there to make money and support that mission. Now, when you tie things like Heywood breach to absolute loss, that's making sure we can't make money. So it's a different way of framing risks, and that's like you look at a consulting organization, we're there to make sure our customers are successful. In return, they pay their bills, and they stop paying their bills if we get breached. So it all ties down to that kind of a world instead of, hey, IT technical controls, because quite frankly, nobody cares about IT technical controls from at the top level.
Preach it. All right. So I have two fun questions to close the loop on this conversation. If you could hire one fictional character as a head of cybersecurity, who would it be and why?
I've been thinking about this, and honestly, I still don't have a real answer. I mean, I'd probably want to hire a telepath, to be honest, as my head of cybersecurity.
Ooh.
Pick any one of them that are really good at what they do, and that's or even an empath, somebody who can sense other people's emotions. That way, when they go into business meetings or board meetings, we can drive to the meat of things, because people are terrible at communicating. And if I could break down communication barriers using those techniques, I could do a lot of damage.
But in a very positive way. Yeah.
Well, exactly, right? Like, I could demolish bureaucracy, red tape, and paperwork and get people rowing in the same way and just, dominate the industry. It'd be awesome.
Similar vibe. But if you yourself could use any superpower to improve cybersecurity, would you choose similar skills?
No, I'd choose something more self-serving in my case. I would choose the ability to instantly decompress and relax. This way, when things are getting sideways, I could stop myself from burning out and keep doing better things. I would not want to be able to see into people's heads. That's a burden that would just completely fry me. But, if I could have the instant thing where I could just tap my ears and go woosaw and be instantly relaxed and calm for a meeting, I would tolerate so many more meetings that way. And
I
be
love
much
that.
happier.
A way to just instantly decompress, bring yourself all the way down. Beautiful. Mm-hmm.
Switch.
Love it.
Cool. So, Dustin, we are almost at the end of our questions. I just have one final one for you. If you have the mic, if you could give any advice to the industry or audience watching, what would it be?
The only real advice I have for everybody is just remember that everyone at the other end of every conversation is human. They're coming from a different set of perspectives, a different set of objectives to you, and conflict will naturally arise in the IT industry, especially when you have people who are incredibly passionate. If you find yourself getting heated or not quite meshing up correctly, take a step back, relax, talk a little bit less in the meeting, and sit there and truly listen, and then come back to things. You might find barriers tend to break down better. The other piece of advice I'm going to give is don't be afraid to say, I don't know, but I will find out. That's how I've gotten so far in my career. Don't be afraid to take a risk.
That's powerful. Yeah, beautiful. I feel like you've really given a lot of extremely widely applicable advice in this episode. I really appreciate that. I think anyone who listens is going to be able to take away a lot of good nuggets from this one. Really nice.
Awesome. Yeah, that's the thing. I just want the world to get better. I mean, I am going to retire in 10, 15 years. It's just going to happen. And so I've been taking a lot to going to CPTC, CCDC, talking to students, passing on this bit of knowledge so that, when I'm, in my 60s playing golf, people can, take these forward.
Sounds like you're going to be 60 and doing scuba diving and other high adrenaline activities. Actually, golf, I'm not sure, is up your alley, huh?
I mean, I like mini golf a lot, though. So, I mean, I can sit there and I don't like full size golf. I know there's something about it doesn't go, but I can do mini golf all day long.
The colorful balls really help, yeah.
Man, Dustin, Yeah, for an evil mog, you're doing a lot of good.
Yeah, that's the evil part is actually more ironic or joking on a number of things. I mean, I got the term when I was actually on the defensive side of the world before I went offensive, so it was kind of a joke.
Dustin, thank you so much for your time, and thanks for being patient with me as I have these various situations happening. We really appreciate your time, appreciate you coming on the first episode of the season. It's been a real blast, and can you tell us, just as a sign-off, where can people find you?
So I'm on Twitter, evil_mog on Twitter, or if I'm on LinkedIn, I'm just evil mog. So that's EVILMOG. Follow me on Twitter for all the random dad jokes and random memes. I guarantee you the majority of them are PG-13 and/or clean. I try and filter out the bad ones, so you should be able to laugh. There's also a lot of cat pictures, so feel free to get overwhelmed by the cuteness.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, and we will see you next time on Cybersecurity Stand Up.